Hello. This is a quick video about my new book, Art and DIY Electronics, from MIT Press. And I'm just going through, I just got the book. I'm just seeing it for the first time today. I sat down in my front yard and I'm just going through a bunch of videos to try to give an overview of the book project. I could make a million videos about this book. I plan on making a lot of them, but for now I'm making quick and dirty kind of DIY videos that explain this. So the previous videos talked about the intro, and currently I'm in this frugal innovations theme. This video is going to be about frugality and telephonic arm wrestling by Doug Back and Norm White, two Canadian artists. And I use this to talk about the idea of jugaad, finances, and function. The functionality and just trying to get things done cheaply, and behavior as artwork. So, what do we mean by that? Well, good thing, because you have this amazing book to describe it. Frugality and telephonic arm wrestling, jugaad, finances, and function. So, telephonic arm wrestling was a project by Doug Back and Norm White that enabled people to arm wrestle. Let's get a picture of it here. Enabled people to arm wrestle in a transcontinental way at very low cost. So one person would have a device like this, other person at the end of a long phone line would have a similar device, and they could kind of battle each other in arm wrestling way before a lot of interactive robotic pieces came along in the 90s and after year 2000. This was really early. And I use this as kind of like a case study to try to flesh out the idea of function. And I talk about jugaad, which is an Indian term that I think is super useful outside of just an Indian context, for people to understand generally how people build stuff, how people make stuff, and how they come across and get over technical barriers in their work. So I start out by talking about jugaad and ad hocism. I kind of introduce the idea of ad hocism, which is a term by Charles Jenks and Nathan Silver, using an improvisational approach, using old and new materials in unexpected ways. And jugaad is a similar concept uh, from India that is super useful. It refers to a lower class social practice of functional fixes and workarounds using found materials. Now, it's a lot more than that. But jugaad can be understood. And I got this image from Deepa Bhutalaya of this dude wearing a kind of a bucket on his head to get around helmet laws. Jugaad is kind of like functional, practical fixes that are done at low cost in an ad hoc way. And actually, I do also talk about the artist Yasha Shetty in this chapter, who's located in Bangalore. And he does, and he uses this idea of jugaad as kind of a guiding principle to his work. So I then go on to talk actually about the main case study in the chapter, telephonic arm wrestling, and how financial constraints work and how they massively impact projects. I mean, it's seems completely obvious to any artist or builder who has tried to put together a project, but this idea of finances often doesn't make it into discussion about in terms of contemporary art theory. and I think that that's lacking, and so I wanted to try to correct that here. So, telephonic arm wrestling, the story of it is that these two art school professors had this idea to build this machine that could allow people to arm wrestle across continents. Here's a circuit diagram from Norm White. Thank you, Norm. And they basically they went to an engineering department to get a quote on building this. They said this is going to cost $75,000. And they kind of were like, okay, I think we can spend like $200. And so how can we do it? Going to like a Canadian Tire or local hardware store to do it for $200. So they bought some torque wrenches. They got some motors out of old printer, and they hacked it together into a kind of a box. That's the control box. But it worked. It didn't work super well. They had problems in it rolling out. They were, apparently freaking out over it as it was rolling out. I think this is all normal and honestly good. But I also use Norm White is a pretty phenomenal person in a lot of different ways. But I expand a bit on his idea of art and behavior as artwork, where function is the artwork. Now, this is really interesting. When I expand on it here, stuff like art should concern itself as much with behavior as it does with appearance. Some of the best art happens on behavior and appearance are completely at odds with each other. Economy of means is a critical part of aesthetics. Art functions best and is most needed outside of galleries and museums. I expand on this, and I think it's really interesting. I actually talk about Nicholas Schoeffer's cybernetic spatiodynamic sculpture from 1956 in it, and then talk about the idea of jugaad and how this is a concept and practice that is everywhere in the world. In India, it's named a particular thing, jugaad. And I talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of that. It's not something to be really romanticized because it's often done as a survival technique. So it can inspire art, but it's often a practice that has big disadvantages and other advantages. So I try to kind of unpack some of that. And I propose that this idea of jugaad is a counterpoint to new media. Jugaad is a counterpoint to critical design. Jugaad is kind of a balance to kind of new media hype, and it's much more kind of like how people actually build stuff. So that was why I kind of spent the chapter talking about jugaad and ad hoc approaches to working with technology and telephonic arm wrestling. In the next video, I'll talk about Thomas Thwaite's toaster project and the frugality of that, and kind of getting lost in technology. So there's a telephonic arm wrestling, art and DIY electronics, available at bookstores everywhere, local booksellers, and from evil Amazon and other places that don't care.